So my guest today is Bree Johnson, and she is an employee rights attorney who advocates for employees who have been harmed or think they have been wronged in the workplace. And she truly gives power to what their truth is. And together with her clients, she stands up for to powerful people that may be trying to minimize or scrutinize what their claims are and make sure that they are treated ethically in the workplace. This is needed more than ever, I think. I think it's been a continuous issue in the workplace, and especially for my audience of people in the home service industry. And as a woman who owns a business in the home service industry, I cannot tell you, Bree, how much I hear people talking about like just the shittiest things that happen to them. So I can't wait to dive into all of this. Bree is also a mom of two boys and an entrepreneur's wife, which means she is crazy as hell, like the rest of us are. And she lives and hails from the beautiful state of Minnesota. She loves lattes, flowers, and lake boating, and was recently in a mastermind that you've all heard me talk so much about, that we all got so much out of, including new friendships like this. So Bree, welcome to Ladies Kicking Ass. Thanks for being with me today.
Thank you so much. I'm so great to be here.
I could talk to you forever about all of this good stuff, because obviously if you have worked in any form of an industry like this, you've got stories. Everybody does. I think that goes for any industry. But tell me a little bit about why you wanted to become an attorney, a little bit about you, like why did you want to go into this area of law practice as well?
Yeah, great question. I'm one of those people whose path has been pretty winding. So my why for law school was really more about, hey, I want to stay in school, want to learn more, poli-sci, print journalism. The job market didn't look great several years, a decade ago. Went to law school with a mission just to help people. Came out of law school in 2009, which was recession. The law firms up here in the Midwest and really across the country were all hemorrhaging attorneys. It was this really kind of dark time for for a lot of roles. Fell into what I'll call the business side of law. And so I spent a decade kind of leading attorneys in a corporate setting for 5 years, and then pivoted to big law and started running departments, really innovative departments, pricing, legal project management, strategy, helping to refine and improve big law firms. And then a few years ago, had kind of a big life pivot for me, which was an aha of, hey, I want to do more. I actually, I want to be working directly and kind of creating the change that I feel is necessary in workplaces. And so for me, that looked like initially starting a solo law firm where I represented employees who experienced discrimination, sexual harassment, sexual assault. Maybe they blew the whistle, they saw a illegal or unethical thing happen in the workplace. And so started that solo practice. And then not long after kind of relaunched with 3 partners. And so we are MJSB Employment Justice. And so we have continued that mission of representing employees. And what I see as kind of my go forward and where I'm really passionate about is supplementing that work of representing employees alongside kind of what I'll call education and advocacy in the big picture about working with workplace culture, helping owners who are really visionaries, who want a better workplace. What are some strategies? What are tools? What are policies that can and should be implemented to create those more inclusive, equitable? And I believe, like in my work, I've seen workplaces become even more profitable when they have kind of a more holistic approach to the workplace. And so it's, both tracks of the train, representing employees and then also working on the workplace in the big picture. So that's been my path. All along it, I've been, as you mentioned, a mom of 2, and now they're 9 and 6, which feels crazy, but a lot of these kind of big roles that I was taking, a lot of travel, happened at a time when they were really little. So I've also have that kind of cross to bear, if you will, of the juggling act that is. And now being managing partner, as I mentioned, entrepreneur's wife too. So there's just a lot of juggle going on. That's kind of my day to day.
I love that you use the word juggle, because when people start talking about balancing stuff, I'm like, it is not a balancing act, because a balance to me is you have one thing on this side and one thing on this side. If you have 17 things going, how the hell is that ever supposed to balance? It won't. It won't. So
Yeah.
it truly is a juggle, and there are seasons and there's time for all of that stuff. And I think it's beautiful to talk to women who are doing all of those 17 different things,
Mhm.
and they're still making it work. They're finding a fulfilling life. They're great moms, they're great partners and wives, and they enjoy their life. So it doesn't have to be one or the other. So I appreciate that you're doing all of those things too. One of the big questions that I would love to hear from you is we hear so much. I don't know if like our news that comes on our phone is just like tailored to like the stuff probably that you stop and scroll up for 2 seconds. Someone gets my phone, they're going to think I'm a serial killer because I get the most obscene stories that come, which are probably listening to me and my daughter watching Hulu murder mystery stories all the time. So but there is so many things that come across talking about um, issues in the workplace, like harassment, inequality that we're still talking about, which I just can't even believe in today's world of stuff, especially in the home service industry in which this podcast is tailored around. Like what are some of the most common cases that you see that are relating to women in the workforce as a whole? And then we'll kind of dive into more about how we see that in the home service industry.
Yeah, that sounds great. I think it's been sort of shocking to me as I have pivoted to do this work. We receive on average, 10, 20, 30 calls a day from people who are experiencing just something at work that they feel maybe unlawful, not sure, maybe they've been terminated. So the most common types of experiences that women continue to experience, and this is why it's such a passion project in the big, is to effectuate like large scale change, because it's 2023. We're now what, 5, 6 years removed from the Me Too movement, where I think so many of us women watched that. Maybe we've had our own experiences and we thought, hey, this should bring about the change that we want. And unfortunately, it's not. And so I think there was enormous good that came out of that movement, that we are now talking about it. We're pulling, those experiences. There's at least a little bit more of freedom for people to kind of speak their truth, which is so important. But I think the number one thing that we continue to see um, for women in experiencing in the workplace is still sexual harassment. And so that inappropriate comments, the propositions, the catcalling, the crude jokes, the inappropriate emails, now it's, DMs, things of that nature happening in the
Mhm.
work context. Sometimes that's kind of at the after hours, if you will, like the workplace happy hours, the holiday parties, those types of things. And sometimes it's just, during the day. So sexual harassment continues to be a theme that we see women experiencing in the workplace. And I'd say the other big area right now that I think there's active legislation in many states is on the parental discrimination, which I think is also really relevant to this conversation, as you and I are both mothers. And, this there was a story recently that came out where, and this is actually at a law firm that represented employers in this case, but it was an employment law firm. And you had a partner in Ohio texting a woman who was on leave and saying, I'm paraphrasing here, but you were sitting on your ass during your parental leave, and just taking her to task over that. And so there's these outdated sort of sentiments about women and what it means to become a mother and how that will affect their work and what they do in the workplace. And so I really think states are reacting to situations like that and are enacting laws that protect women and new mothers. And Minnesota recently enacted some legislation around nursing mothers. So there's progress. It's slow though. And so where there are laws are sort of in reaction to really bad situations that arise. What is even slower to come about is the change where the culture actually improves. And there's not sort of these,
Mhm.
whether it's microaggressions or, I was terminated after I returned from leave. Nobody said anything, but you can kind of infer what that was probably, in response to. So we get a
Sure.
lot of that still happens. And then just, garden variety, gender discrimination continues to occur in the workplace. It's pretty rampant too.
Oh, I'm sure. I'm sure. I know that definitely is something that we battle with all the time in the home service industry of things, Some of these women that are working in these offices and doing these things, they are doing just as hard a work literally as, the laborious jobs that are out in the field. Just because it's mind over body doesn't mean one should be more, I think, compensated heavily for, versus like, oh, she just works in the office. I hate that more than anything. And I know hate's a strong word. That tells you how much I hate it. Like, hate when people say she just does this or they just do this. And not to minimize the field or the office, they're both very important parts. We don't have businesses without them, but it's not just an office. Well, she just works in the office. She gets a lot of barraging and harassment from customers and from the field and from, and same thing with the guys too, they get that same thing going in there. So I know there's definitely discrimination on both sides. It's not just the females. We talk a lot more about the females on here because that's our audience, but I just want to throw that out there, that we definitely know that that happens on both sides of the wheel for people, and it's dependent to the discrimination in job class that are there. I had one of my not one of the best pump truck driver I've ever had. His name's Keith, and I remember him coming in even 2 weeks after he had been with me, and he's only like 22 years old when he came to work for me. So I remember him saying, "Thank you so much for not yelling at me. Like, I love working here because I don't get yelled at every day." And I was like, I've told this story so many times on this podcast, but I'm like, what? Like, that's the most bizarre thing to me in the world, that someone is getting yelled at. Like, do they think that increases their productivity, like treating them like shit? Or do we encourage them and coach them instead of reprimanding them all of the time? So really having women in even managerial and leadership positions in these kinds of industries is helping change and shift that culture a lot, because most of us don't behave in that way, that maybe the good old boys industry of this is the way it's always been, this is what we do with our workers. We can help curtail that a lot, which leads me to my next question of, like, tell us, as business owners, from an attorney's perspective, what is the best things that we can have in place to both protect our employees and to create a very prosperous culture that our employees can thrive in and enjoy working in? Because in the home service industry, it's not always like, I grew up and I wanted to own a septic company, or work for a septic company. But the people that I have that work here love their job. And we've been able to create a really cool culture because we are aware of these things. But from a legal standpoint, what would be your best practices for business owners to put in place immediately to curtail any of this?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think, tactically speaking, I think the basics of having policies and then having reporting procedures. So have a sexual harassment policy, have a non-discrimination policy, include that as part of, if you've got a manual, great. But even if you don't have like a full comprehensive manual, just having those policies, giving those to each and every employee, and then having some process where, if I feel, if I'm one of your drivers and I'm out on the job and I experience something that feels really off-putting, maybe it's a client says something, maybe it's, a colleague says something, that there's a channel that they can report. And why that's important is for a few reasons. It's so that employees have the sort of wherewithal and knowledge of how to report. So it's not something that festers. It also creates sort of business protection when they can report something, so that you're not hearing about it, 9 months down the road after they leave, and now they're bringing, a lawsuit because they experienced something and didn't feel you handled it, but you've got this channel where they know where they can go and report that. I think it also demonstrates a important level of sort of consideration for the employee's experience. If you have these types of policies, you're talking about them, it's part of the culture. And it's really, whether you have in writing or not, but effectively a zero tolerance for this type of behavior, I think also sets the standard, and then doesn't allow, any kind of an escalation to occur.
Yeah. I think that's one, definitely in this industry, that prohibits a lot of people from saying anything. And I say people because men and women on both sides, because there is this stigma around this home service industry of like, I don't even know how to say this in like a diplomatic way, like snitches get stitches.
Yeah.
You know, like it's truly like that kind of like you go say something, then we're going to make your life a living hell at work, or you go say something like quit being such a wuss, or it's very much that rough and tumble kind of mentality around things. So as a business owner, creating a space where they feel safe to come and talk to someone, and that they feel protected once they have aired their grievance to you, is so incredibly important.
Yeah. I think this like concept of a workplace as a safe space, I don't know, there's like this underbelly connotation of it, which is, oh, this woke culture or something, but in effect, it is better for business. Like think of in this environment where it's difficult to staff, it's difficult to find people and retain people. If you don't have a safe space where someone can go and talk, they're just going to leave, right? And that's not good for business. And so
Yeah.
it's like,
Yep.
it is a really important mechanism. And I believe like that's how there can be change, is when things are out in the open. And I can only really imagine kind of those headwinds that you face about, which is like that over culture of don't say anything, just tough it out. Like this is the way it
Yeah.
always is, but then nothing changes, right? Then you don't have the change. And I know you run your business this way, which is a value-based business. And, you value collaboration, you value communication and transparent dialogue on this, and you respect your employees. And so that when you're a value-based business, when you have these mechanisms, you do create a safe space. You're not always going to be able to resolve, like maybe there's a personality conflict, right? And sometimes
Sure.
those can be worked through and sometimes they can't. And certainly, not everything that happens in the workplace that is kind of like this is what happened is unlawful. But should that happen in your workplace, you've kind of created that foundation where people feel comfortable coming through these reporting channels to know at least you're going to listen to them. You're not going to shut them down. And frankly, that's,
Sure.
the obligation that a business owner has is to handle and kind of receive discrimination or harassment complaints as they come in.
Yeah. What Now that you've said the word woke with all this stuff, like I literally didn't know what that mean and had to ask my child about it. Like, what the hell does this even mean? I don't get it. But I think for even people of like our age or even older, like sometimes they'll look at this generation now. And we did grow up, like our parents grew up even rougher tumble than we did. I grew up pretty much like that. I grew up in that construction industry, small town, good old boys place. And then I look at my daughter and the way that I'm raising her. So really like this 3 generations of things. And the things that sometimes they will say, I know that like racism has been obviously in the news all over. Like when I was a kid, I grew up in Wyoming. We didn't talk about that a whole lot. We just didn't. Like there wasn't a lot of that around. So I find myself as a parent trying to navigate through some of this stuff. And even with my younger employees of sometimes the things that are said are offensive to one group of people, and they're not necessarily offensive, or say like our generation saying something to our kids, we don't understand how that has now become an offensive thing for them. It is like if someone says the color brown or the color black, like I hear these little kids on my soccer team, like, that's racist, and I'm like, they're talking about a soccer ball. Like, but I think that they hear that so much of things that are going on. Like, what do you say to business owners that are kind of facing that struggle in the workplace too? Where like maybe the younger workforce is offended over everything. And what part do you start taking it like this really is discriminatory, or like stop getting offended over every little thing everybody says? Does that make sense?
Yeah, without a doubt. I mean, there's such a balance here. And I think, I want to be really responsive to the question. And then I have some just general other thoughts, which is as a business owner, the number one thing that I would encourage you to do is go back to your state's discrimination statute. And so every state is going to have a statute that really clearly outlines, and then there's federal law too, But like in Minnesota, we've recently enacted even more expansive protections that include things like discrimination is prohibited when it is hair texture, and it's an extension of the Crown Act. And so and the reason I bring this up is because when we talk about things in sexual orientation, discrimination is prohibited in Minnesota. So there are, if you're wondering specifically what may give rise to a discrimination claim as a business owner, something you want to avoid, right?
Mhm.
Go back to that
Yeah.
statute and look at those protected classes. And, one thing to consider is when there is comments or conduct that somebody is making that directly involve those protected classes, that's a red flag moment. Because whether you as a
Mhm.
business owner, feel like the comment is offensive to you or not, if someone is of a protected class, if they are gay, if they are transgender, if they are, race, origin, religion, all of these things, and a comment specifically speaks to that, that's a space, that's a real red flag space that someone, whoever made that offending comment, my recommendation, and I don't tend to represent employers, but it's good practice to reprimand the individual who made those comments, in some
Mhm.
form or fashion, because yes, it's putting that documentation in can protect the business owner. Then there's this bigger conversation, which I think is really appropriate to be having. And speaking of a safe space, I think having these open and honest conversations about the experiences of, say, our parents who are, possibly still in the workplace, the 60s, this is a whole new world for them, right? They weren't having
Yeah.
conversations that involved, so many things that are now really active conversations. And you may have as part of your workforce people who are Gen Zs, who this is, really impactful for them. And they do have a different level of sensitivity. And so there is a little bit of, as a business owner, threading a needle of, how am I responsive to all these parties in this situation? And this is just
Mhm.
mainly at a human level. I think it's operating with a sense of curiosity. So if someone were to come to you and say, hey, I felt like what you said, or I felt like what someone else said was offensive to me, as a business owner and in creating that safe space, my encouragement is to get curious about it. Okay, let me,
Yeah.
say kind of like say more. Let me understand more about this. Because sometimes as a business owner, as the sort of receiver of a complaint or a report or a, hey, this was wrong, just demonstrating that you are willing to listen to them. Sometimes they don't want advice. Sometimes they don't even want to fix it. They just want someone to listen, right? And
Yeah.
some people shut that down and they say, "Oh, you're too sensitive. Shut up. That's the way we've always done it." And you do enough of that
Mhm.
as a business owner. Not saying you would do that, but if a place of employment, a workplace does that often enough, that person is not going to have a great experience, and they're going to be looking for more stuff, right? Um,
Yeah, for sure.
so full recognition, it's a balance, and it's not always easy being a business owner because, in fact, I had an experience today where I was talking through just a little bit of a, difference of opinion, different working styles, and kind of working through some of that. That's an often experience for anyone in a leadership role. And I think it's
Mhm.
just important to create that space where you can have some dialogue around it.
Yeah, I think one of the most important things, and I know for myself, just listening to you talk through that, like these need to be topics of conversation that you're having with your team. Like we need to be having these meetings that are just centered around what is what is considered discrimination. Because honestly, like especially in this workforce, like this industry, it's a little rough and tumble. It just is, like they just think, "Oh, quit," like I said before, like, "Quit being a wuss," or "That's not a big deal," or "That's just how they are. That's just how they are." I hear that all the time.
Mm-hmm.
Or, "It was just a joke." What may come out of your mouth or your employee's mouth as just a joke can literally land you in some super hot water as an employer if you don't do something about it. So it is very important to continue to keep having these conversations. It's not a one and done thing. It's a constant communication about this specific kind of topic. And I know it in this industry for sure that it's one that people sweep under the rug big time. I also think it's also one of the reasons why most women don't want to work in this industry too, because they don't feel like they're going to be protected working in here or be validated for things that they say, shit that's going wrong in the office or the way they're being spoken to or talked to, that is a big no to me. But I think that's something that in this home industry, if we were really looking to improve the rate of women coming in, especially women working in the field, we have to be able to provide better working environments for them. And that starts with us not tolerating any of this. Like everything is important, then we can start seeing some change in it. If you just let it go how it's been for so long, nothing's going to change, and we were talking before we hit record on this, like those people, kind of going into our next subject we wanted to talk about is like toxic workplaces. Let's say you have a business as business owner, or you're an employee that works for one of these businesses and it's already toxic. Like there's guys that are, checking out the new girl in the office and they're making bets on who's taking this chick out. And I'm just talking about this. I've been in it for years. I know what happens behind the scenes. And sometimes people don't want to hear the gross and the ugly of things, like my comment before. I've heard that so many times on job sites. Like, you go talk, we'll see what happens, like not only did you just harass them, but now you're threatening them on top of it. But it just gets like, that's just how it is. And it doesn't have to be that way. So what would be your advice if you have a business and you see that it has kind of some toxicity in it? Or if you're an employee in that, like, what do you do to try to help fix those things? Or be the difference maker,
Excuse me. Yeah. So, as the employer, I think it's about, if you see something, have a process, and maybe it's just like jot it down on paper that the first time you see it, it's a verbal warning. The second time you see it, it's a written warning, and then it goes to a final, so that you have some process and procedure to rely back on, so that you're not, so that somebody can't come back to you and say, I was targeted for this. Just like some sort of process, some sort of procedure that you're following when you see this, because you're going to be able to use that, should something happen in the future. And if you have to terminate somebody, right? As an employee, the number one thing I can do is, so when you're still employed, and I'm going to talk a little bit about discrimination and what actually rises to the level of discrimination. But, if you feel as an employee that you are being subjected to something that feels uncomfortable, that is really, this also is true for like whistleblower claims. If you're being asked to do something that feels unethical, that you think is illegal, to keep quiet. Maybe you were just a witness of sexual harassment or, God forbid, but sexual assault or something, or you learned of it and you're being told to keep quiet and you want to report. My number one thing an employee can do is put in writing just a really quick, this is what I witnessed. I believe I'm being subjected to discrimination. These types of things are important for that employee to put in writing through whatever reporting channel. Maybe that's the business owner, maybe it's an HR person, maybe it's a supervisor. Just put that in writing. And here's why. When an employee makes a protected report, then we're on the lookout as an attorney for retaliation. And so a business owner cannot then retaliate against that person for making that report. So if you're in that really toxic culture and they do terminate you, they cut your hours, they cut your pay, they demote you, those are all adverse employment actions that give us rise to say, hey, this now sounds like, in addition to you witnessing or feeling like you were discriminated against, you're now being retaliated against. And if you're terminated, then that's typically the point at which we recommend an employee get in touch with an employee rights attorney, because it's possible then that employee has a claim for retaliation.
Sure. Holy schmoly. I think it's such a great conversation, Bree, because people in this industry don't talk about this stuff. And I think it is because it is so visible. And it's almost like if we start talking about it, we invite these claims. So what do you say to that? And I'm saying this because I have brought this up before to people that I have been associated with, their workplace, consulting stuff. And you say things like this, and that's kind of the business owner's mentality of, if we start talking, then this happens. And it's not just like sexual harassment, discrimination of stuff. It's like business owners in this industry sometimes don't want to talk about workers' comp insurance and the availability of it, because if I talk about it, y'all are going to go out and get hurt and then have a claim. And then, like, basically, if we just stay quiet, then we don't have to worry about it. And it's on a few different things. So what would be your advice for that if you're kind of on the fence about some of those things?
It's such an important perspective to, if I talk about it, then it will come, right? Then it will like rain down on me and I have to deal with it. But I'm just have such a different perspective, which is, I think the more we talk about it, the more we are pulling it out into the light. Let's be real precise about what discrimination is. Discrimination is not some of these offending conducts or comments, excuse me. It's, am I not being promoted? Am I being denied job opportunities? Am I being terminated for my status as part of the protected class? So it's really more precise. And I think, we get a lot of calls at the employment law firm of people who feel like they're being bullied at work, which is not discrimination. And so I actually see, and granted, I'm like a, glass half full kind of person, but I see the opportunity to be more precise about what is discrimination, what is actually rising to something that is unlawful. And when you create that standard, I don't think that necessarily will lead to more claims. I think in part, it's actually a protection of the business owner for having had these conversations. You're the liability. If you're training your supervisors about what it is and it isn't, you have appropriate channels. If someone were to experience it in your workplace, and you're creating a place where people feel like they can make protected reports or actually make a complaint, I think you're actually protecting yourself from an overall liability perspective, and you're furthering the workplace culture that I think will enable and likely limit those types of behaviors in your workplace. So maybe that's too, optimistic, but I genuinely think that it's better when there is a fulsome understanding, because otherwise your employees, there are going to be people in your workforce, and maybe, I don't mean to stereotype, but it's more likely than not going to be some of those Gen Zers who are coming up, who maybe are feeling like everything is discrimination. And I'm going to sue you. I'm going to talk to a lawyer, when in fact, all they've had is a few, offhand comments that could have been corrected had they been addressed head on. And when you're the business owner and you're creating that channel to do that, again, that's where you kind of limit your liability, and more likely than not are preventing something like some headache down the road because you're dealing with it head on. The other thing I want to speak to is, I think there's a real opportunity for small businesses. So a lot of larger businesses will do this. They'll put their supervisors through trainings and workshops and, those types of things. And I don't know that that's as much a practice for small businesses. This is an area I'm, really interested to launch into, because for me, it feels like the flip side of the coin that I talked about when we started, which is that, yes, I represent employees and I actually want to make workplaces better. But I think small businesses can tap into whether it's, low cost sort of workshops and trainings, so they don't have to do it. Because I think in business owners, you may feel like pressure, like, oh, I've got to be an expert. You're already wearing so many hats, and now I need to be an expert in all things employment law and discrimination and all these, additional layers. When in fact, there are, trainings that I think if you bring someone external to do a lunch and learn, to, have that quick training, you put them through it, you've got a couple processes in place, that's a really solid foundation for a business owner to have. And those workshops really, aren't too much of a burden when someone else can do them.
I love that idea. Plus, if you reach out to people, there are people that are dying to get in front of an audience and be able to talk to them, because maybe they're a consultant. Maybe there's someone like you that actually represents employees and they want them to understand, like, from a basis of preventing any of this from happening to you, these are the things that you need to understand too, Something I want to touch on real quick, going back a little bit on something that you said, that like you talk about how bullying is not discrimination. I think that gets so intermingled all the time of they said this, so they're discriminating against me. What is, from an attorney's perspective, the definition of like bullying and maybe example of that, and discrimination, and like maybe how the bullying becomes discrimination, but to distinguish the difference between the two?
Yeah, yeah, great question. I love this. I love kind of playing out case studies because I think it is really fuzzy for people on both sides of the street in terms of both for employers and for employees. So, the types of calls, let me give you an example of a bullying call. My boss has been after me. He is targeting my work. He's constantly telling me it's not good enough. I just feel like I'm being targeted. It's been years of this. I've tried. He yells at me. He is rude to me. He speaks differently to me than he does to other people. And so they will call us feeling like, and often they're still employed. That woman will call us and say, I'm being bullied at work. This is a toxic workplace. I'm being discriminated against, and kind of use some of the employment language to say that they feel like it is an unlawful behavior in the workplace. What I will do with a person who's had that experience is I will ask, do you give me examples of how he is targeting you because of your gender? And so this is where the distinction comes in between bullying. So employment, and it's unfortunate, right, that there are workplace situations that can be really harmful to an employee that just don't rise to the level of an unlawful workplace situation. And
Sure.
so when I ask a question then of someone who feels like they've experienced bullying and they can't come up with any answers that are, targeting me because of my gender, comments that taking away my hours, so on the other side, discrimination, right? Discrimination looks like, I make comments, women shouldn't be doing this work. I can't believe my boss hired a woman. This is a joke. You don't even know how to do your job because you're a woman. You're small-minded. Isn't women's work in the kitchen? And then that same person then later, writes you up on a PIP for, what seems like no reason, and then terminates you. And in the termination meeting says, it just doesn't feel like women should be doing this work. Something like that, right? That's a very clear, you're getting the indications because you are a woman, because you are a member of a protected class, and that supervisor is then affecting the terms and conditions of your employment. That's the big sort of differentiating factor that also comes up. Now you're terminated because of your status in a protected class, and that's discrimination. So over on the bullying side, when we had someone that just felt targeted, but they're still employed, their pay has not been impacted. They may feel like it's, offensive or harmful conduct to them. And my guidance to someone who feels like there's bullying is to make that report. If they feel, go through the proper channels, have that conversation so that it's kind of documented that they're having those feelings. But typically that's not an employment case. That's not a claim that they can bring. Unfortunately, there are people who don't get along. There's a lot of personality conflicts. And that just isn't because of their status in a protected class. So that's kind of where the difference is.
Excellent. Very, very good examples of stuff. Because I think definitely they're like, well, at what point is this, and even being able to distinguish that as someone, as a business owner or a manager that somebody comes in and talks to, knowing the difference between those two is so incredibly important. So thank you so much for that. This has all been such incredible information, and I know people can use this. I encourage everyone that listens to this that is a business owner or a manager, just do a training. Talk about it. Do something. Put it on your calendar for every quarter. We're having a conversation about this again. You have turnover, people forget things. Sometimes if it's a toxic thing, you need to be doing it more often and break it down into tinier little pieces so people can digest it and implement it, and then hold their feet to the fire once they have been educated on this. It's something that I practice in here whenever we have a training on something or something new comes out with a new policy. We have a meeting about that, and then they sign off on it knowing that they have been giving this education for things. So making sure that you're doing stuff like that. If you're not having team meetings already with your team, put that on your schedule first, and then make this definitely one of those things that you talk about. I try to center my meetings like we have a sales meeting at the beginning of the month, and then we have just a policy type of meeting that we talk about something about our industry, and then just talking about, kind of where we at with setting our own personal goals and intentions of things. So if you struggle with that, there's you an outline for things you can do. Recently, Bree and I both went to a mastermind that Lindsay Schwartz was hosting from Powerhouse Women. And I just want to talk to you, kind of shifting a little bit here as to what your take was on the mastermind, and how you feel about masterminds in general, if you've been to them before, and the importance of getting your cute butt into those rooms and what you can get out of those things. So will you kind of elaborate what your experience was?
Wow. Yeah, it was incredible. So no, I'm a total rookie, never done a mastermind, never really invested in, sort of personal. Last year was the first year I had kind of a coach into specific areas, and sort of mentors. But I have never done anything like that. And my experience jumping into it was Lindsay and I actually went to undergrad together. And so that's how I followed her, but I attended a remote Powerhouse Women event. And for some reason, as I saw this community builders mastermind continue and our content coming out on it continue to pop up, I just intuitively felt like I needed to be in the room. And it was like, I was exceptionally resistant to it. I was like, why? I'm not sure. And I certainly, I just didn't see whether it was a good fit. I didn't think it was like a natural alignment with what I was doing, but I just kept feeling called to put that deposit down and just do it. And I cannot tell you the transformative effect that mastermind had. That meeting, I think it was 21 other women, I think it was 22 of us together, had on my confidence, my soul, my spirit. I feel like I have friends for life, and people that I think it's incredibly important to have people that I know that are cheering me on no matter what I do. And that's how I feel about each and every one of you. When I see posts come up, I'm like the biggest cheerleader, because I have been missing. It was like, for me, I had been missing community, whether it was COVID and some other life changes that I've had. I feel like I didn't have a community. And this experience gave me that community that I so desperately longed for, and a transformative personal experience, and tools and tricks. And it's priceless, honestly, in terms of my investment. And I will tell you, I was scared shitless, which I'm sure, it seems like it was a common experience to walk into that room, because I've had, I didn't know what to expect. And it's been so long since I put myself out there, and damn, that like those days and what it did for me as a human, like at a really deep, profound level, has been incredible. I just feel forever changed, and just so grateful that whatever universe was out there calling me to do this, that I did it and took that action.
Yeah. I second all of that. It's amazing to me, because I have always worked in these male dominated industries. I have women that work on my team. I have friends, not a lot of them that are entrepreneurial friends, but kind of like they've been my lifelong friends. And I've always had this story in my head of like, I just get along better with the boys. Like, I'm in this girl in the boys club thing, and I'm comfortable here. Walking into a room full of women, that I was thinking, what in the hell do I have to contribute to these women? I own a septic company. Like, what am I going to get out of this? These guys are coaches, they're lawyers, they're like, even in my mentality of like, this morning I was even thinking, I'm like, you're interviewing your first lawyer today. Like, in my small little mindedness of things, still it's like Bree's a lawyer. Holy shit, I know a lawyer, like, because that's just where I was at. I think if you're looking to get into a mastermind or find a group of women, I can't stress enough why I'm saying all of this is stop finding people that are just like you. Find people that can bring a different perspective of things to the table. Find people that are in different industries, find people that are at different levels. There were people in that mastermind as we got to know each other that like were just barely having an idea of something and didn't even have a business. And the more people started talking, I was like, I can contribute here. At least I've had a business. I've been in this entrepreneurial game for 14 years already. Like, I can contribute here and help them with things, even though they're not in my industry. And even if it's just the cheerleading and the mindset, like social media, I literally have like my brain has been reprogrammed to find y'all on there. And everything that everybody posts, I'm so just enamored with everybody that was there. Like I always want them to know, even if it's the simplest post, like I see you. And that what you're doing is actually meaningful and people are showing up to stuff. Because I know it can get so discouraging when you're starting to do stuff, whether you're starting a service business or a personal brand thing or anything like that, that you're like, I keep posting all this shit and no one is commenting, no one is liking, like it's a waste of my time. But when you listen to people, I was listening to a podcast with AJ Vaden and Lori Harder last night, and they were talking about personal branding. That's what they do. But they were talking about how like that consistency of things always pays off. Like you have to keep showing up. And they were talking about how their business strategy was literally like they were just going to outlast everybody else. And eventually someone's going to see them, you know? Like I need you to understand that there's not a grand plan. Most of us don't have shit for a plan. We just have a passion that we're trying to share or help serve other people with. And it's so beautiful with what you do because you are doing that in such a needed place in this world. But just your like the posts on your new Instagram, which we'll link below. So make sure that you go and follow Bree. You posted one on there this last week that was like, I'm just going to change the way that I think about stuff. I can't remember exactly what it was, but I was like, I screenshotted it. I'm like, this is going in my rotation of my screensavers on my phone because it was something that was so like just profound of like, you can change your life by literally just deciding how you're going to look at things. So thank you for doing all of that stuff. And when you get into rooms like this, like I would have never met you before. Like what circle are we ever going to come together in? And I felt the same way. Like, why the hell do you think you need to go to this so much? You know? But it was truly like that community of what I was seeking and what I thought I needed with just people in the home service industry was completely opposite of what my soul really needed. I can help those people, but what I need is people pouring in that have different perspectives and can help you grow. I don't know about you, but like the change that you experienced in there, how much has that catapulted to your personal belief that you can now go about and do whatever the hell you want to?
Absolutely. And I think that's it. It's the finding a group of people. And, I think this was an incredibly special container, but I believe it exists in so many other spaces and so many other communities.
Mhm.
It was just my first experience of this container now where I was inspired by everyone else's big dreams. It was at a what sounds simple and yet was so profound to be inspired by everyone's big dreams and to know that I can dream big, to have the permission because we all have very unique big dreams and we all have different visions for our future, but it's the permission that was sort of granted through that experience that I can dream big. And hey, I've got a group of women who are going to support me through hell and high water. Like, no matter what that
Mhm.
looks like, no matter what my big dream is, no matter how, maybe it feels outlandish, how my future self feels like a stretch for me, they're going to support me through that. And it's just, it is incredibly profound. And I think that confidence, that sort of launch to know you've got that foundation to fall back on and to ask advice and to have conversations raw about the hard stuff, the good stuff, the big dreams, and just to know somebody's got your back. It's been just like life changing, really. I'm so
Yeah.
glad. I was reflecting ahead of our podcast too about you and I sitting across from each other at that fun brewery, right? And just talking about life.
Yeah.
And the extracurricular time that we had for each of us to connect as humans was fantastic. And these really important and deep connections that were forged through that, it's just going to carry me for forever.
Yeah. It really does. And then I come back and I'm like, y'all have to do this, and then I'm like, calm down. Not everybody wants to go there. So don't I think one of the biggest takeaways from that too is there is room and a place for everyone. And you don't have to be like this, because how freaking boring is our world going to be if everyone's trying to fit into the same box? You know, I know Joanna and I talked about too, like we sat in the back room and was like, ooh. And as soon as Lindsay said shit or something, I was like, I'm with my people.
For sure.
It's almost like the permission of the icebreaker situation there. So really, if you decide to go to one of these masterminds, walk in there and be your big, bold, beautiful, authentic self, because that's what everyone is looking for in there. I know we all walked in there scared to death to be ourselves because we didn't know. I remember like after the first day, everybody's like, let's go get a glass of wine. I'm like, oh, but that brewery's across the street. I'd rather just go have a beer.
Mhm.
I like wine too, but like it's one of those things where you kind of like contain yourself a little bit to try to be the prim and proper of what you think you need to be. The people that you want to serve and genuinely serve and will receive the most out of you is going to be best if you just be your complete authentic self. And I think it's so beautiful that we saw so many different examples of that in that room.
Yeah, for sure. Just that unapologetically you deserve space. Like it is valuable, it is valued, and bring it all. Like, right. That's what she invited. And it was so great.
Yes, I loved it. I loved it. Thanks, Lindsay. No. Um, so Bree, tell us what's the big things that's on your horizon? How can we best support you? All the goods.
All the goods. Yeah. So, I'm early in my journey of this other, supporting workplaces, making workplaces better. It's going to look like workshops, trainings. I'm going to be offering some executive retreats too for people who are in business so that you can step away and have like business brainstorming, but also do some wellness things. So that's all coming to fruition. I'll be posting more on Bree Johnson Official, which is my new Instagram handle. And that's going to be the
Mhm.
space to find me right now. There's more to come, all sorts of goodness, but the best place to keep sort of in tune with updates as they come out is Bree Johnson Official.
Excellent. Excellent. So we'll link all of that stuff in the show notes too. So one last question in closing that I ask everybody that's on the podcast, that Ladies Kicking Ass is all about building community with kick-ass women that want to be unique, want to share their passions, they want to help, they truly want to. They're not in a community of takers, they're a community of givers. And so my final question that I always ask everyone is, in your own words, what does the phrase ladies kicking ass mean to you? Who is that? What is that person? What does it mean to you?
So I've been thinking about this, ladies kicking ass, and I've just really been feeling this in my soul lately. Ladies kicking ass is a woman. It is a lady who wants to be the change, who sees a future where things are better, whether that's for herself, for the people she employs, for the people she works with, for the people she partners with. She sees a change and she is going to be that change. To me, that is someone who is kicking ass and who is going to shape and change the future for the better. And that's somebody kicking ass.
Oh, I love it. I love that perspective so much. Thank you so much, Bree. This was so much fun. I appreciate all of your knowledge, all of your direction in helping us as business owners and employees. And I know all of your stuff is going to be incredible. I can't wait to see what you come out with and what we can support you with. So thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.